If you've ever felt your soul draining in certain relationships, whether with partners, friends, or family, if you've been told you think too much or you're too intense, what you will hear in the next minutes will explain every toxic connection you've ever had. And I'll also share 3 powerful strategies to break free from that kind of relationship that diminishes you. Carl Jung, the Swiss depth psychiatrist, in his deep study of the psyche and the unconscious, recognized that a small group of rare minds operate differently from the common pattern. While most people move through life guided by the senses, focused on immediate facts, tangible data, and what is right in front of them, rare individuals are led by intuition, either as their dominant function or as a powerful auxiliary function, constantly perceiving hidden patterns, possibilities, and meanings beneath the surface. This distinction later became formalized in the MBTI system as the S versus N divide. Sensors stay with what is concrete. Intuitives reach for what is unseen. Jung observed that the intuitive is always the suspected element in our rational society. Rare people who process the world through intuition often face resistance, not because they're wrong, but because their way of seeing unsettles those who rely only on the obvious. And Jung went further. In Psychological Types, he explained that when someone's inferior function is confronted by another person's dominant strength, it creates deep discomfort that almost always turns into criticism or rejection. And by inferior function, he meant the less developed side of the psyche, the part we usually don't control and often don't want to see. That's why deep intuitives are targeted. Your natural gifts, perceiving patterns, exploring possibilities, understanding complexity, expose the blind spots of others. Instead of admitting the gap, they turn you into the problem. If you're one of these rare minds, an INFJ, INTJ, INFP, or INTP according to the MBTI system, you've already met at least one of these attacks. Comment "seen" if you've ever been made to feel guilty for needing time alone to process your thoughts. And stay with me, because before this video ends, you'll discover the 3 exact relationship types that will keep draining your clarity until you stop them for good. But I need to warn you, the 3rd type isn't just toxic. It's so destructive that if you don't catch it in time, it won't only exhaust you, it can dismantle a deep intuitive mind completely. Let's begin. Type 1. The surface level performer. The first kind of relationship that drains deep intuitives is the one built entirely on appearances. These people live for performance, a carefully curated image, constant validation, and an endless chase for social status and positioning. They are threatened by depth because authenticity exposes that what they are showing is constructed rather than real. For those with dominant introverted intuition, like INFJs and INTJs, this becomes obvious immediately. You see the gap between who the person is in public and who they are beneath the surface. Your instinct is to connect with the real person, the truth behind the performance. But here's the trap. When you reach for something genuine, they don't feel grateful. They feel exposed. Your ability to see through the mask makes them defensive, even hostile. For those with auxiliary extroverted intuition, like INFPs and INTPs, the clash is different but just as draining. Your natural way of speaking is to explore ideas, possibilities, and deeper meanings. But the surface-level performer can't follow that current. They hear your depth as incomprehensible, or worse, as judgment of their lifestyle. So the pattern repeats. Every meaningful topic is redirected back to the surface. Gossip, status updates, material acquisitions. Your depth is shamed with remarks like, "You analyze everything," or "Why can't you just be normal?" They only reach out when they need validation or an audience to admire their achievements. Any moment of vulnerability makes them uncomfortable, sometimes even dismissive. Over time, this criticism seeps in. You start questioning whether your natural way of thinking is too much, whether you need to simplify yourself just to stay connected. That is the cost of spending time with performers. And when you begin suppressing your leading cognitive functions, when introverted intuition or extroverted intuition is forced into silence, the conflict turns inward. Jung taught that psychological health requires the free development of our dominant way of understanding the world. When social pressure forces you to shrink this function, the result is inner dissonance, a constant tension between who you are and who you pretend to be. Comment depth if you've ever been told you were too much for simply being yourself. Type 2, the rigid controller. The second type of toxic relationship comes in the form of the rigid controller, the person who appears caring while slowly dismantling your intuitive potential. Rigid controllers live by narrow worldviews. They cannot tolerate uncertainty, abstract thought, or unconventional paths. Everything must fit their template of what is acceptable, verifiable, and safe. Carl Jung's theory of psychological types helps explain why. Controllers rely on concrete, immediate information, and so they feel deeply unsettled by intuition. For those with dominant introverted intuition, like INFJs and INTJs, your ability to perceive long-term patterns and invisible dynamics looks unreliable to them. Rather than admit they cannot see what you see, they dismiss it as unrealistic. For those with auxiliary extroverted intuition, like INFPs and INTPs, your need to explore multiple ideas and possibilities threatens their rigid worldview. They experience it as destabilizing, even dangerous. Their methods are subtle but systematic, questioning how you spend your time, interrupting your solitude, dismissing your insights as impractical, reframing control as concern for your best interests. They try to prevent your freedom to use your natural cognitive strength, your intuition. Over time, if you're not cautious, your insights shut down before they can even form, your creativity stalls, and you begin doubting your own inner compass. This is how gifted intuitive minds are slowly convinced that their way of thinking is not just impractical, but fundamentally flawed. Type 3, the emotional vampire. The third toxic type is the one I warned you about. It doesn't just drain you, it dismantles you. And unless boundaries are set immediately, these emotional vampires, the narcissists who breathe chaos and feed on your energy, will strip away your clarity until nothing remains. Carl Jung wrote often about psychological energy, what he called libido. He warned that unhealthy relationships can deplete this energy to the point where growth becomes impossible. And this is exactly how emotional vampires work. They have no stable way to regulate their own inner state, so they use your gifts to do it for them. For those with dominant introverted intuition, like INFJs and INTJs, the trap is immediate. The moment you hear chaos, your mind begins searching for patterns, analyzing causes, seeing where it began, imagining where it could lead. You offer clarity, solutions, and a way forward, and the other person gives you the impression of relief, as if your insight has changed everything. But this response is calculated. They know your tendency to connect dots, to seek meaning, to find solutions. By appearing grateful, they secure your continued involvement, yet soon, the same crisis returns, and then another and another. And this is where the damage cuts deepest. Each time you step in, you invest not only your mind, but your heart. You begin to believe that maybe this time your care will matter, maybe this time the pattern will break, but it never does. They feed on your insight and your emotions the way others breathe air, and their chaos never ends. For those with auxiliary extroverted intuition, like INFPs and INTPs, the trap takes another form. INFPs feel the pain of others deeply and want to help them align with truth and authentic values. INTPs try to map the logical patterns behind the dysfunction and offer structured solutions. But in both cases, you are pulled into the same endless cycle, trying to heal someone who has no intention of healing. Every interaction with them becomes a crisis. There is always drama, always urgency, always some emotional fire demanding your attention. And no matter what insight you give, no matter how much you help, they resist every real solution. Because here's the truth. The crisis isn't an accident, it's a strategy. Chaos is not their burden, it's their fuel. What they are really doing is handing you their disowned shadow, the weakness they refuse to face, the chaos they refuse to take responsibility for, the pain they refuse to work through. They dump all of it onto you. You become the container for everything they cannot admit about themselves. That's why no solution ever works. Healing was never their goal. Their goal is to make you carry what they cannot bear. And because this subject is so crucial, I'll dedicate an entire video, maybe even a full series, on the hidden bond between empaths and narcissists and how to break it for good. Comment next below if you want to have it soon. Now that we've explored the 3 toxic relationship types, it's time to shift toward the 3 strategies that protect you from them. But before we go there, I need to emphasize one crucial point. What makes these patterns especially destructive is that these toxic types rarely appear alone. Most of the time, they arrive together, creating what feels like a slow suffocation of the intuitive mind. The surface-level performer teaches you that depth is embarrassing, that it makes people uncomfortable. The rigid controller convinces you that your insights are unrealistic and must be corrected, and the emotional vampire drains your energy until you can't think for yourself. Together, they form a psychological cage, one that shuts down the very abilities that make you rare and valuable. And when they appear side by side, they don't just challenge you, they also reveal something about you. Their presence is often a sign that your boundaries are not yet fully formed. That doesn't mean you are weak. It means you are still learning where your depth ends and where someone else's demands begin. Jung understood that psychological growth requires supportive conditions. When every surrounding influence resists your natural way of thinking, development doesn't just stall, it begins to reverse. And this is where the real work begins, because protecting your gifts as a deep intuitive isn't only about recognizing toxic patterns, it's about building the kind of strategies that allow your mind to grow freely. Now it is time to discuss the most important strategies to protect your cognitive gift. The first is to build boundaries. No one can do this for you. Boundaries are the lines that protect your energy, your time, and your clarity. Without them, toxic patterns will always find a way back in. Boundaries don't make you distant, they make you whole. The second is to surround yourself with good people. The right friendships and relationships matter more than you think. Seek those who value your depth, respect your solitude, and encourage your growth, and walk away from those who shrink it. The third is to commit to self-integration. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for him, this was the heart of individuation, the lifelong process of uniting the conscious and the unconscious, of becoming whole. Protecting your gifts means doing the inner work, integrating your shadow, owning every part of your psyche, and becoming the kind of person who no longer betrays their own depth. In the end, the choice is always yours. You can keep tolerating relationships that shrink your clarity, or you can protect your gifts and let them grow. If this video spoke to you, share in the comments which of these toxic types you've recognized in your own life, and subscribe if you want more depth on the psychology of rare minds. Thank you for watching. See you soon in the next video. Take care.